This apple tree here in front of Trinity College
Yeah.
is supposed to be the great-great-great-grandson, or whatever it is, or granddaughter, of the apple tree under which Newton was sitting when an apple fell, and he suddenly had that moment where he understood how gravity worked. His first great work on gravity. Whether it is the apple tree, who knows? There's another one. The original is in Lincolnshire at his home, and or at least a descendant of that one is there, and there's another one here. So no one knows, no one really minds. It stands for Newton, and what Newton stands for, Newton is widely regarded as the greatest scientist who's ever lived. He was a young man who came from a middle-class family in Lincolnshire, came to Cambridge quite young, and then spent his formative years thinking. Someone asked him how did he discover the laws which still really rule our world. Many of his laws still exist alongside those of Einstein and so on. And he said, by thinking on it all the time. And for about 10 or 20 years, he just sat and thought. And that's one of the things that Cambridge can provide, because this is the richest college, Trinity. It could have a man just sitting there doing nothing. He was rather autistic, that is to say he was rather lonely, he didn't talk to many people, and he would sit for hours and hours and hours doing the complex mathematics, which finally led to his theories. And no doubt food was brought to him and he just carried on. He was obviously a very complex character. For instance, more than half of his manuscripts, many of which are in King's College, are about religion. And unlike many modern scientists like Richard Dawkins and so on, he didn't see a conflict between religion and science. He was quite devout, and a lot of his work was really trying to find out God's laws in the physical world. So he just sat and worked on this. Then he was made the head of the Mint, the place that makes money in London, and his character changed entirely. He drank and he sang, and no doubt, and was a very social being. But during that very, very complex business, another thing that fascinates me about him was that he worked in his internal mind, working out these problems of how the whole universe, he's not just thinking of Trinity, he's not thinking of England, the world, the whole universe out to the furthest stars. He single-handedly, more or less, worked out the rules of that. And two things that I like about that endeavour was, one, that he was very humble about it. He famously said, when asked about his own position, he said, "I am like a little boy standing on the edge of the ocean of knowledge, throwing in a few stones." He realized that almost everything else was to be discovered. The second thing that interests me is that he worked out his theorems with a form of mathematics which he'd taught himself, and he'd devised himself largely, unknown to other people. So he reached his final great conclusions by this form of mathematics. But then someone said, "Well, you may be right, but can you prove it to us?" And he realized that using the kind of mathematics which he alone understood, he wouldn't be able to convince anyone else. So he had to rework all his workings in conventional mathematics. So he did that, and it took him another long period. The other thing that's interesting about him is that we think of him as a great physicist and concerned with mathematics, but also he was very important in astronomy, and his second great work was on optics. And so he laid the foundations for astronomy and modern aspects of optics. And this is what lies behind a very, very clever rhyme which was made by a man who was his contemporary and just after him, one of my favourite poems, Alexander Pope. And Pope wrote an epitaph for Newton to be used when he would be buried in Westminster Abbey, but it was never used. But the epitaph for him plays on his interest in light. He did famous experiments showing that light could be broken up using lenses. And Pope's epitaph was, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. So it's all was light in a double sense. And so probably it is Newton alone, or singly, who has helped to make Cambridge the greatest scientific university the world has known, because Newton, just his presence, then led in the 18th century to the founding of a number of chairs of science, gave confidence, and in the 19th century, when Oxford, for example, didn't really take up science, Cambridge did. So he cast a great shadow over his successors. So he was not only enormously important in his own life, but much of modern science in the West has come out of his inspiration. And it's wonderful to think that he spent 20-30 years just here in Trinity. And there's a great statue to him by Rubilak inside the chapel here. Okay?
Okay.